So I find myself very put off by those conversations.
Uh-huh.
Because people in my world get very opinionated and agitated.
Yeah, that's
all
right.
that.
Yeah.
And I am trying to manage myself so that I don't go into that space because I don't like how I feel.
Yeah.
And so I've been trying to practice loving kindness about different aspects of those social issues and then do the next right thing. What do I feel like I can do that has positive or feels like what I'm supposed to do? So my question is there a solution to these social issues in Buddhism? It seemed like that was what the conversation we were having was about. And if there is one there, I am totally listening.
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge that, in the 12-step world, we say we have no opinion on outside issues. And many times, and certainly people don't want to hear about politics in an AA meeting. Because but that's the quickest way to create conflict where we're trying to create harmony. And the Buddhist world faces a little bit of this as well, because people come and they're like, I came here to meditate and get peaceful, not to think about all that bad stuff. And understandable. But on the other hand, particularly in the last couple decades, a lot of people in the Buddhist world have felt that they had a responsibility to speak out, against racial injustice, about climate change, about denial, and so when you say, is there like a Buddhist answer? So we have to really understand that Buddhism isn't one thing, right? There's different sects of Buddhism all over Asia. And then there's what we're doing here, which is something completely different, right? We're all sort of trying to draw from some of the core principles. And certainly the Four Noble Truths are acknowledged as the starting point of all Buddhist traditions. But what we do with that then can vary widely. And I think there are people who come and want to meditate and learn to quiet down and want to get away from all that. And and after this recent election, for those who were on the losing side, I certainly felt, and a lot of people around me, including my daughter who has worked in politics, were like, I don't want to look at news. I don't want to think about this, right? And I felt the same way. And then at a certain point, I said, yeah, but I can't, curl up in a ball and ignore the world. And just because I'm okay, like I'm not threatened because of my, being a white male or whatever, and I'm middle class and I'm retired. So then, it seemed to me like the old thing of, well, they came for the, so-and-so. And since I wasn't one of them, I didn't speak up, right? That famous set of lines. And I've kind of felt like, yeah, I have to consider this, and I don't know what to do, what that means exactly. I mean, I've gone to one march, and I would have been marching today were I not here. But going to this core question you're asking, if we choose to look at Buddhism through a social lens rather than through just a spiritual lens, like that, in other words, the implications of the precepts, the 5 precepts, which are to not kill, not to steal, not to harm sexually, not to lie, and not to use intoxicants. Well, it's possible to take several of these precepts and make them more universal, so that to not kill is to say that I'm going to oppose war, you could say, or you could even say it's to support gun control, right? But it's not in the precept. Nobody's saying like that's the Buddha didn't say, don't use, well, they didn't have guns, but he didn't exactly say don't use weapons, but to not steal. Okay, does that apply to people that are exploiting, in business? And then again, it's not, if you choose to interpret it that you can take those things and say that that's what's your guiding principle, but it's not like that's a rule or something. It's really a question of how people are interpreting it. And in fact, Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's like a great Buddhist scholar who spent decades in Sri Lanka translating the ancient texts, at a certain point decided that it was more important to engage in social issues than it was to translate these texts. I mean, he continued to translate, but he said, like, he felt that Buddhism was in the West was becoming this kind of way for people to just make themselves feel good, and neglecting the underlying principles that the Buddha did talk about, having a just society. And he addressed things like the responsibilities of a king, of a ruler, and what makes for a harmonious country, and so, and then he addressed things like the role of parents, and so those are all in there. But what I recently read an article, I actually have it on my computer. Maybe I'll read some of it at some point aloud. He said Buddhism in the West has arrived at a place that he calls postmodern Buddhism. He says there's traditional Buddhism in Asia, where it's practiced as a religion, and there's the monastics, and there's the rituals and a lot of devotional practice, and it looks very different. You don't have a lot of lay teachers. You wouldn't have a community like this. There'd be there'd be monks and nuns maybe here. And then, so that's traditional Buddhism. And then what he calls modern Buddhism, which I think would be more like what a lot of us, what sort of arrived in the West in the 70s and 80s, kind of like the Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfields, the Pema Chodrons, even Thich Nhat Hanh, where you're taking these basic Buddhist principles and presenting them to a Western audience in a palatable way that's very influenced by Western psychology and values. And then what's happened in the last couple of decades is now you have like the LGBTQ retreat and the BIPOC retreat and the Buddhist recovery meeting and the climate change retreat, and so it's not fragmenting per se, but we're breaking down into people selectively using Buddhist practices and principles for their own purposes. And I would say, I mean, I consider myself to be very much a part of the larger Buddhist community. I don't think of myself as separate from that. But I also recognize that I'm selectively pulling out certain things from the Dharma that really apply to this certain condition of addiction, and that then I'm going to develop that. And I think that's a really, really interesting development. So when it comes to social issues, again, this can be, maybe that's what you're interested in, right? And you're a Buddhist practitioner and you're like, the Buddha was really concerned about the environment, and you can definitely find that in the suttas. There's lots of similes and even the story of the Buddha's life and the way the monks lived is very much in harmony with the environment. Now, again, it's not like the Buddha said, "Oh, go hug a tree or something," but it's inferred, and you can sort of, I mean, it's implied. You can infer it. Don't want to get those two mixed up. Get in trouble with my wife. She was an English professor. So so there isn't, in other words, there isn't a direct answer to what you're saying. You have to look at it in this broad way. Okay.
This is applicable, but on April 26th, or you might want to say something more, April 26th, we are sponsoring someone who's going to, it's called Braver Angels. And as I understand it, he's going to help us learn how to engage with people of the other side in a way that is consistent with, I think, with Buddhist principles, certainly along kind, compassionate lines, but to engage in conversation that's productive and moving us forward. Laura, that's exactly it. It's 2 hours, it's free, it's here, 3 weeks from today. Register on the website or just show up.
So how to talk to people with red hats?
Yes, sir.
I'm talking to people who are different.
Really, just, I need it.
Well, it takes two to tango, as they say. So, I wish you well.
It's predicated on deep listening. As a position, so that you don't tangle up immediately.
So you can trip on later.
So you can have a conversation without having the conflict go sideways right away.
I need that.
I mean, finding common grounds.
That's what it's about.
Yeah.
I've had a question sort of germinating since yesterday, and I'm not sure I found the best way to articulate it, so I'll try.
Okay, well, we won't grade you on that.
Okay. I'm new to Buddhism and 12 steps. But I was wondering, it seems like hope is an important part of recovery. And the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path hold an aspect of hope, of at least coping with suffering. Can you talk about the interplay of hope with Buddhism and recovery, and how that might help us also get through the day right now, given everything?
Yeah. That's a great question. I would start by saying it's important to distinguish what I think of as two types of hope. One is hoping that something will happen without any basis for that to happen. Like, I hope that I become a rock and roll star, but I didn't make a record. So it's kind of unrealistic, right? We have these kind of like a dreaming kind of hope. I hope I win the lottery. Have you bought a ticket? No, I haven't really gotten around to that. Yeah, that's not going to happen. But even like hoping to win the lottery when you bought a ticket is, somewhat irrational. So but the hope that makes sense is that there is hope, that there is a possibility of something better. There is, and so I was talking last night about step two, that step two, we could, we could say is about that kind of hope. That there's the possibility of something good happening. There is hope. So this was like hope versus despair, right? And so that hope implies an engagement. It's not, you're not just sitting there hoping. You're engaged. You're taking these steps that could lead to the result that you want to get. You know, you're going into treatment, you're going to meetings, you're working a program, you know, you're not just sitting there. I hope I get sober. I hope, you know, it's like, no, well, what are you doing to make that happen? So that kind of hope is founded in the idea of cause and effect, of the law of karma, that there is this possibility of change, and that if I take the wise and skillful steps toward that, show up, that it's very, very possible, maybe even likely, that the things that I'm working towards will happen. So now, where I take hope also is not just thinking about cause and effect as something moving forward, but also looking at history, because history is a place where we learn a lot about possibilities and likelihoods, right? About cause and effect. You know, if you study history, you're really seeing how this led to that, right? And so that's one reason why I have a lot of hope about our present political situation, frankly, that, you know, historically this country has swung back and forth, but it comes back to a center. And it's if countries have karma, which I think they sort of do, we see that some countries always are led by a strong man. So Russia, a really good example. For centuries was czars. The czars get kicked out, and you wind up with Stalin, you know, another strong man. You get rid of the communist leaders and you wind up with Putin. And one after another, it's not, karmically, the country isn't inclined toward, doesn't have a history of like moving towards democracy. So when they tried to implant democracy 35 years ago, there was no like thrust for that. There was no framework for it. There was no like mentality of what it was. So to me, that's the opposite of our country. That's what, again, why I have hope, because I think despite, you know, there's been a lot of awful things that have happened in our history, but if we look at the thread in terms of leadership, and in terms of the structure, it's always been this, you know, balance. There's never been an authoritarian government, and I think it'd be very hard, as much as, you know, I know people didn't come here to talk. Let me just finish. It'd be very hard for one person to step in and change that whole flow of 250 years and like just implant it, just like it was really hard for the Russians to try to implant democracy. It's just very hard to change that whole thrust. So that's where my bigger hope is. You know, I really didn't, you know, I never would have talked like this, even last year. I was very hesitant to bring the political world into Dharma centers, but I really do feel like there's been this change, and people are not getting, I expect people to tell me they don't want to hear about this if they don't want to hear, they don't want me to talk about it if they don't want me to.
Say we asked.
Well, maybe. So I, you know, anytime anybody's like uncomfortable and like, you know, push back, I'm fine with that. But it just seems like it's kind of like it's so here for us. Anyway, we should do something else. So I have an idea. I didn't just think of it. Now, this is one of my favorite exercises. So, and you know, I think it's helpful for people to, you know, for rather than just always be me up here talking at you, for you guys to connect and talk with each other. Anyway, I'm going to do this one more in the way that I do it on retreats, which is I'm going to ask one person just to talk. And I'll give a prompt. I'm going to give you this prompt, and then you'll be with a partner like you were earlier. But only one person won't be a conversation. One person will talk, and it'll be about 5 minutes. then I'll ring a bell, and then you'll switch and the other person will talk. Okay, so, and then, afterward we can process it, but, so this is more of just intentional listening and intentional speech. And the advantage of that is that you're not going to get interrupted. There's not like sort of a ping pong conversation. It's just you get to process. And if you run out of things to say, you can stop and just be quiet for a minute. And maybe something comes up and you pick it up again. But you've got the floor. And if you're listening, it's just to watch your own mind. It's a really great exercise. Watch your mind when you're listening to people. Notice how you're thinking as you're listening, right? And you're thinking about what you think about what they're saying or what you're going to say to them or all of that. So, and in this exercise, I encourage you to, whatever shows up, let it go and just come back to listening. Okay. So let's pair up before I give you the prompt, because it's a little bit of a subtle prompt and you're going to want to hear it.
You don't pair up before? You were I'll sit over. Amanda, so.
I know this morning we needed one group of 3. We might need another group of 3. Okay, so this question is meant to be sort of unraveled. So you might have an initial answer to it and then keep asking yourself if there's like underlying answers. So the question is, what underlying desire was your addiction trying to satisfy? Okay, what underlying desire was your addiction trying to satisfy? And there may not, and it's not like, oh, there's one thing or you're going to name, okay, I've got it, but just reflect on that. Okay. What underlying desire was your addiction trying to satisfy? And the person who's got the longer hair goes first. You may begin. Take it away. You guys need to figure out your time a little bit. So you're going to need to switch at a different timing because I'll give you a clue.
So I'm just. And so I was good thing for the first place. And I had a friend. After I get to the question was, and I went to Alan the underline, and I just saw how I and get all the secrets and as a member of the I was so young that I didn't really realize the cause of the effect. Or years ago, my husband gathered down. Able to articulate it, know what was my dad was there. Cigarette burn. I was so anyway, there's so many things in the child, which is good. Because I did where I've been really, I was really speaker. And still. I can do it on record, but I just, leading it all. And I can't lead it once it starts. Really, still. Because it's. So. My addiction is, I guess, is trying to keep it lost. All the public go through. So, yes, it's not bad. I don't see 5 minutes. I don't want to speak. But. And I will get it because I'm trying to change their section. That's what brought me to you. It's and I'm supposed to but I started talking about and one of the minutes and he brought me on. And I'm going to involve in one day, which I late 6 and you just gotta make sure things. Now it's past.
So let's take a moment just to settle before switching. Those guys are still going because they're divided differently. So, or not. So you're going to switch roles. Speaker becomes the listener, the speaker, answering the question, what underlying desire was your addiction trying to satisfy?
This next. Functions.
Fourth grade, it's bad.
It's all open now. No longer. So that almost look like this is when you're
So sad.
I noticed.
Want some. I realized that it was totally. So we're getting not. Whatever it is.
He wants to go to bed.
So how was that? Any comments? Anything anybody discovered or wants to share or experienced? Yeah.
I became aware that when I had to zip it and just listen, I was much more aware not only of what she was saying, but of my reactions.
Yeah.
My reactions were much deeper than what was about to come out of my mouth. That I was reacting. That was quite powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to speak mindfully, frankly, because I mean, my explanation for that challenge is that ego is made up of thoughts. And when we speak, we are speaking our thoughts. Therefore, we are speaking our ego. It's very hard not to speak our ego. So listening, I think, provides a great, like, when you really let go of trying to be part of the speaking and just get involved in the listening. Wow, it's very rich. It's beautiful. Yeah. And the thunder agrees with me. Well, now I know why they understand why they named their basketball team that. I see. I know we're not in Oklahoma, but anyway, I digress as usual. Any other thoughts, reflections?
So I have a friend who suggested to me recently that when I go into a conversation with people where I can lose myself, that in some way, he said, ask yourself who's listening. And
Who's listening?
so while we were doing our exchange, I would forget that I was listening, and a couple times I said, okay, who's listening? And there wasn't any answer. It wasn't me as a construct that was listening. It was an essence that was listening. And I don't know that I had any reactions other than trying to stay in that presence of who's listening. Something's listening. I'm hearing the words, but it's not me as an entity or character.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great insight. And it's, that the Buddha explains our sense experience in a typical Buddha way, which is that he says there's for listening, there are ears and there's sound. And when the sound hits the ears, there's ear consciousness. In other words, you can, without consciousness, sound can hit your ears, but you don't hear it. Like, did you ever say, like, somebody said, did you hear that? And you're like, no. But your ears, it hit your ears, but you weren't paying attention, which is the consciousness, right? So that's all there is. The I that's listening is something that we add into that mix. It's a construct. What's actually happening is that there is a sound hitting an ear and there is consciousness of it. There is awareness. There's not. So when you're sitting like that, just asking like who's listening, you're just basically saying, you could phrase it another way. What is listening, right? Because the who is a construct, right? It's just an idea that is just, it's a heavily conditioned and trained construct. Like it's put together, it's very functional, that when I hear what you're saying, not only am I aware of hearing sound, but I understand that the sounds you are making have meaning. And I understand that meaning as far as I understand it, through my own lens. And then I have a history with that meaning somehow. Then so there's a story, and all of that is the self that comes out of just listening, called the bare attention of ears hearing sound and knowing that they're hearing sound. Again, I was talking about this, I think last night, it's like we deconstruct our experience, right? And when we get down there, oh, this is all there is. Yeah. It seems like there's more, you know, is this, but on the absolute level, there isn't really more. That's all there is. Anybody get into this question about that underlying desire that your addiction was trying to satisfy?
Good. I'm struggling with this right now. You know, you and I were talking about basketball. I could probably talk about the level truths as they relate to sports for like an hour. But when, like, I was with my counselor on Tuesday, and he asked me about feelings, and I just don't have much to say. And when he asked this question, it's a difficult question, and I'm sure I still don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Answers, theories, I guess. I'll just make this personal. I've been coming to these group meetings for months, and I've been meditating and all that, but you know, I slipped a few weeks ago and I went out and did meth, and I don't know. I'm really struggling. Again, why I keep doing it. I'm very much, man, I relate to your story. I'm in your Alaska phase. I feel like I'm in your 80s. You know, you at the first wedding, you know, all this stuff where I just, it is 40 years ago, but I'm trying to get out of that state. And, you know, I've been going through that for months with my counselor.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've done the 90 meetings in 90 days, but one person came up to talk to me, and I just, you know, I went the wrong way. So I keep wanting to say I'm looking for the high, kind of the Timothy Leary, you know, all that stuff in the 60s, trying to find it, just that perfect, like I said, that Jimi Hendrix moment where you're listening to the music and it's just that perfect, when the alcohol hits and just all of it, chasing that, and can't get that in a lot of ways through the right mindfulness, right concentration. And so I want that. I mean, it's the craving. I mean, I think that's what it is. Is that kind of a desire? I mean, craving is desire, but I mean, that's my answer to the question right now would be. The underlying thing is that feeling of consciousness change.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something you can keep investigating, you know, that it's one of those things where I keep going, well, I want that, but what do I want from that? What am I getting from that? But I mean, going back to your fundamental problem, if I may, I mean, the fact that you recently relapsed, you know, brings up the question of what does allow us to sustain our recovery. And I'm pretty traditional when it comes to that, you know, that I think that in the beginning, there has to be a really strong determination. As much as we say, oh, it's like, you know, God, you know, and that determination has to be based in a total acceptance that it simply doesn't work, that what you're imagining will never happen, that there is no satisfaction in this, that there is no high that you're going to get that's going to work, that this is a dead end. I think for those of us who maintained recovery for a while, we gave up on that. You have to give up on it. And if there's, and again, I mean, I don't want to, you know, make it like sort of magical statements, but in a way, it's like if there's one little glimmer in the mind that maybe there's still something out there, at some point, we're going to pursue that. So that to me is the starting point. If that doesn't get established, all the rest of it just falls apart. Like meditation doesn't protect you from that. Mindfulness doesn't protect you from that. it's that behavioral part that has to start. And it's, although it is founded in your mind, it's also just like like there's just a red line, no, just a no. And because, when we get into the like, well, why do I do this? It's like, we're addicts, we don't figure that out. Oh, well, it's because of this or that. That doesn't help us. What am I trying to get? Oh, like you can spend all day like trying to figure that out. And it's like, does it work or does it not work? Have I given up or have I not given up? And from once I've established that, then there's possibility for growth and on a path and spiritual growth and spiritual awakening and going through the steps. But without that, all the rest of it's, meaningless. So you got to just stop. And I'm not your sponsor, but yeah.
You just personally, this happened so recently, and I was trying to finish the book for the retreat, so I mean, I've spent 200 pages with you the last week since it's happened, and a little bit of the kind of like you're chasing waitresses, you're chasing connection. I think there's some chasing, 40 years ago, maybe. But there's something inside that.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it.
There's a lot. I mean, there's no doubt, my answer to this question, which I worked with some time ago, what's the underlying desire that my addiction was trying to satisfy, was love. But I mean, that's just the way I characterize what I was trying to get at. I want, because I want to feel comfortable. I want to feel peaceful. I want to feel safe. I want to, be happy. And it's like, and the love as connection, which this is like one of the modern theories of recovery too, right? That addiction is a kind of disconnection, and recovery is about a connection, which is both internal and external. That we connect with ourselves and we connect with others, and that there's a disconnect from that we're trying to somehow, cope with and heal. Not even heal, but fix when we're acting addictively. So I hope that wasn't too hard on you there.
No, I mean, it's helpful to know your story.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've got space from it,
Yeah.
Further away from it. In my, if I go 3 months, it's not as prevalent.
Yeah. I mean, technically in my story, I didn't relapse after I got sober, but I was trying to control and manage my drinking and using for years, so that when I did get sober and when I stopped, it was because I had realized that I could not control it, and I had tried every other way of fixing myself, and every way of, I'll just stop drinking and just smoke pot. I'll just drink and stop smoking pot, whatever, count my drinks, the whole routine. And so I feel like I relapsed many times. So before I was able to make that decision.
So I started on this, right? Well, I hope I started on it 6 or 8 months ago, I guess. And it's not been without difficulty, and I would say relapse, but I noticed the first 90 days that I was sober that the thing that I was using went from something, alcohol, that I was using, often 5 or 6 times a week, for no reason. then it became something else. I started watching MMA videos and war documentaries and just awful depictions of people tearing each other apart. So and I also read through your book in the last, series of months also. And I'm just curious how do you manage the fallout of managing addiction? Like, how do you keep from watching war documentaries and people bleeding everywhere? How do you manage? Because it seems like it's still in there, whatever I'm still trying to get away from.
Well, it's a common sort of commonly acknowledged that addictive personalities, when they stop one addiction, tend to fall into some others, and that's part of the process of recovery, is managing that and not getting into destructive replacement addictions. Like food is a very common thing people pick up, relationships, sex, gambling, TV, gaming, so this is, first of all, this is why I think we have a program that suggests every day when you start out, you should go to a meeting and hang out with those people, maybe go out to dinner with those people, kind of just structure your life in a way that there's wholesome activities, and get to the gym, and start to take better care of your body, pay more attention to your diet, just be more conscious, make more consciously positive choices. You have more of a possibility of making good choices because you're not the addiction of MMA videos is not as strong as the addiction of alcohol. It's probably easier to quit than alcohol. And so it's really a matter of making a broader commitment, a more complete commitment, and then to understand what that you get to see that, this addictive behavior was not just about that substance. There's something inside me that I have to deal with, and I have to heal that. And there's therapy, there's meetings, there's working steps, there's meditation, there's spiritual practice. So it's a full-time job, as far as I'm concerned. I'll go to my meeting and then I'll go on and have my life. It's my life is kind of built around not just recovery in the narrow sense, but in a broad sense, that my relationship with my wife, with my daughter, with my work, it's all, informed by the values that are in recovery. And there's has to be this kind of attention given to, am I taking care of myself? And am I slipping off into unwholesome and addictive habits so again, the mindfulness of how you're feeling and the decision to make choices that are how can I cultivate a positive feeling right now is a good guiding principle as well. Is this, I'm about to turn this on and do this activity. How am I going to feel? And even how do I feel moving toward it? The grasping and the neediness and oh, wow. Maybe one of the things I realized at the end of my first year sober, when I had just stopped drinking, but I hadn't really worked a program, was that maybe the reason I was chasing after a relationship so hard was that I was lonely. And maybe if I went to meetings every day, like they told me I should do, I wouldn't be so lonely. So it's just a very practical kind of what's going on? What am I feeling? What would a normal person do if they felt lonely? and not what I would do. Like that's often a question I ask myself. What would a normal person do?
Yeah.
As if there was such a thing, but yeah, it really takes a lot of commitment, you know. Quiet on this side of the room. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when the addiction, the thing that I was trying to say is when I was in high school and grade school,
Hmm.
I didn't particularly think that I fit in like a lot of.
Yeah.
I wasn't one of the guys.
Right.
And when I was 16 years old, I was visiting Arkansas from California. My father lived here, mother in California. I was transported back. I was here at 16 years old between sophomore and junior year, did not have a high school, did not have a car. I was visiting. Two guys that worked for my dad, one 21 and one 18,
Mhm.
took me and another guy, his friend of ours, that was a year younger than me, out. To show me Little Rock. We drove around Snappies and some of these places you go back. And they went out somewhere, they got a bottle, they passed it around and handed me this bottle. And say, hey man, you're cool, guys. We didn't think you'd do that.
Well,
So the kind of the way to fit in, to be one of the cooler, more sophisticated guys, was to have a car, which I got, and when I was 16, and we drank. And so alcohol became the default drink of the sophisticated adult.
well,
And it was that way for decades.
Yeah.
And over the years, kind of wandering around with your socks always damp, and it built up to the point where it snuck up on me.
mm,
My genes weren't turned on to be an alcoholic, but
Mhm.
they were the expression of those genes got turned on over decades.
yeah,
And it just snuck up on me. And so, there's a book written in the 60s, I'm okay, you're okay.
yeah,
And I think Bill Wilson was one of those guys that said, I'm okay. If the world's not okay, you're not okay, because you've got all these problems are all these problems are caused by you.
Yeah.
And I was the other than you might be okay, the world's probably okay, but I
Yeah.
don't.
yeah,
That was the thing that's the thing that I eventually just became the habitual thing to do. I didn't drink because I was angry or
right,
felt bad, or I just
Yeah.
drank because it's 5 o'clock.
yeah, no, yeah.
But that's what's.
I mean, that's like the literal addiction, right? It's just like you do it because you do it. Yeah,
That's what's,
yeah,
I really don't fit.
yeah. Well, I think I could also characterize that as I want to be loved. In a different language, but fitting in, same thing, right? Yeah. And actually, the way I phrase that is, I wanted to feel loved, because many of us are loved, but we don't feel it. People, when someone says, "I love you," and you're not really interested in them, it doesn't really make you feel loved. It makes you feel more creepy. Like, yeah. Anyway, that's one of my weird observations. Yes.
I hadn't really thought about the underlying desire
Mm,
question. My response was somewhat similar to yours, but you said love and made me think, well, my underlying desire was acceptance.
it's another term for love. Yeah.
Then, I think one of the things that is good about AA is you go to meetings, there is a forum for acceptance.
That's right.
It sort of provides that, in my case anyway, what I'm looking for,
Yeah.
to realize it until I got there, and then I was just like everybody else.
Yeah.
Acceptance for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. That's great.
You can get sober without community,
Without a community?
without support.
What do you think?
I wish I could say yes, but I can't. We have a son who amazingly got sober some basement, some house, without. And really hasn't pursued, he's very afraid that if it's gonna be pulled back, it's big.
Huh.
Rather than. And I just feel like his hunger. And he's adopted from Korea, and I think partly this feeling of a sense of abandonment. I think that's what it's that. But I'm beginning to think the community is so important. If you think of the blue zones, where people live long, productive lives, one of the big things is relationships.
Mhm. Yeah.
Sleep, diet, relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't like to make absolute statements about can someone do this, but clearly community that's, we talk about the 12 steps as being the program, but I think the program is meetings, I think the 12 steps are a really useful tool, but I think, and in Buddhist terms, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, it's the Sangha, right? The community. It's one of the three jewels. So, in Buddhism, we kind of start with the Buddha. But even Thich Nhat Hanh said the next Buddha would be the Sangha, right? And so, yeah, I mean, humans are social creatures. I'm sure somebody could stop drinking without a community, but sobriety is not the same as recovery, as far as I'm concerned. Recovery is a much wider, broader thing than just, I don't do that anymore. Sobriety is like the negative, right? It's the letting go of the harmful thing, but then there's a whole other process that we have to go through, and rarely does that work alone. I mean, it's again, just like meditation, like maybe you can sort of learn to meditate on your own, but what, it's very difficult without at least a teacher. and it's much more conducive to have a community that you can come and sit with. I mean, here we are, here's this center, this beautiful community, this ecumenical community. And I mean, it's like they say it's like the disease of our time too, right? The loneliness, and particularly, men who tend not to be as social as women, young men, old men, men.
Don't get us started.
I know, really. Well, I think we should begin to move towards the conclusion of this day. And so before we do conclude it, I want to say, like, first of all, if it were not obvious, I didn't have a big plan for today. I had a couple ideas and a couple things just kind of came up. But if there was something you came for today, like something that you were like hoping to hear about, we have enough time for me to talk about something. If there was like, like it's Buddhism in the 12 steps, I've always wanted to, I guess he's going to talk about this, or maybe he would do that. If I didn't do that, I'm open to hearing, that, whether it's a question or just a topic. If you don't say anything, then I'll be able to say, well, they got what they came for.
Have a question about, we talked a little bit about identity today, identifying facts,
Mm.
holding on to that, the power of that. And yet I say I am an addict.
Yeah. Great question, yeah. Well, it's one that's certainly come up many times over the years. And so the way I prefer to think about this is that we have a term in Buddhism called skillful means. So skillful means it is something that we do that supports us in our goals. That nonetheless isn't so what I mean in this case, I find that saying my name's Kevin and I'm an addict helps me to stay sober, to stay clean, because it's a reminder that that in this case it's kind of black and white. Like I can't do that anymore. And talking about, really embracing being fully committed. When I say that, it's like I just am putting down this marker. From a Buddhist view, I could say, well, I'm creating an identity, and that can be limiting. But this identity is useful, and it's serving my purposes. I know, in the larger sense, that that's not who I am. That doesn't define me. But it's useful. And so I use it with that, proviso that I understand it's not absolute truth, but it's useful. And one of the things I say to people who are like, well, I don't want to adopt an identity as an alcoholic, is I like to say, okay, when you let go of all your other identities, then you can let go of this one too. But because it's sort of a phony thing. It's like, well, I'm a Buddhist and I don't really want to have an identity. Well, you just created one by saying you were a Buddhist. That's an identity. What about when you go to work? What's your title? Well, I'm an engineer. Okay, that's an identity. Do you have parents? Yeah. What's your relationship to them? I'm their son. Okay, that's an identity. Watch your relationship to all identities, right? And then see which ones are useful, which ones aren't, and realize that none of them define you, none of them are real in the absolute sense, but they're functional, they're useful. If I go to the airport and I try to get on the plane and they say, okay, I need to see your ID, you're like, I don't need an ID. There is no self. No. Like that's a construct. I'd be like, you're out of here. But so we use these in a functional way. But yeah, it's useful to watch your attachment to it, because we do see people. I've certainly seen people in meetings who like that became a very constricting sense of who they were. Like that's who I am, and like. I can't step out of, I'm an addict. And it's like, well, okay, but you can be more than that too. So that's where I would say it can be limiting, if that's just your sole identity. But to hold it lightly. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Well, let's just.
I want to ask.
Okay, good.
I'm under the Al-Anon, so my addiction is codependence.
Yeah.
What can you offer to help on that?
I'm sorry, we're running out of time. You people. Yeah, I mean, I recognize, first of all, like that's not my program. It's not my main issue. So I don't often I don't address it that directly. And so much of my language is about substance and sort of addiction in that sense. I try to broaden it out, but I know it winds up kind of getting somewhat narrow. But I think that it again comes down to being attuned to how you are interacting, what's coming up for you. And when you feel that tension, it's kind of like, I need to do this for them. I'm uncomfortable. I mean, I see it. My wife falls more like that. She's not a full-on codependent, but she tends, I can see that, like, when I'm having a hard time, she wants to jump in and fix it. And I can see that it's uncomfortable because sometimes I have to say, like, I'm okay. I'm having a hard time, but I'm okay. I don't, like, when I had my knee replacement, she was like the first couple days, she was like, oh, here, here's your crutches, what can I get? And I was like, you know what? I really need to get up and be mobile and take care of myself. I don't want to lie here and be waited on. I'm not going to recover if I just lie. I need to move my body. So I had to literally tell her, like, no, stop trying to take care of me. These are the things that I would really like. Would you, if you're making dinner, I'm on board with that, but don't try to, like, hold my fork for me, kind of thing, So I think it's really to be able to be present for, like, going back to that, like, to feel your own, that tension. And of course, for a codependent, this is the antidote. Stop looking out there, right? Turn back. Oh, what's going on inside me? It's hard to let go because I feel like I'm not okay if you're not okay, or something like that, right? So the opposite of the book, right? I'm not okay if you're not okay. And so to be able to be like, okay, even when you're not okay, or to not be okay, and just feel that and not act on it. Just say, this is difficult. How do if I can't let go, then I need to accept that this is how it is. I mean, it's a pretty basic insight that I can't fix you. And the way I know that is that I can't fix myself. And if I can't even fix myself, over whom I have the most control in the world, of all the people in the world, I have the most control over myself. And I can't control my mind, my feelings, my body. I mean, within limits, but it's still going to get old, then what makes me think that I can fix you, take care of you? It's certainly the great challenge of parenting, among other relationships, but especially parenting, that feeling that, oh, I have to take care of you. And we know that ultimately that can wind up crippling the person we're trying to take care of. Just like if my wife just took care of me and I just lay in bed the whole time, my knee I'd never get any strength back in my legs. I would just, get weaker and weaker. So it's a really hard thing to watch your children suffer. And yet we know, like, how do we learn? How do we grow in life? Usually through suffering. People don't, like, grow and change if they're not challenged in some way. That's why we see spoiled rich people, having completely unproductive, meaningless lives, because nothing was ever hard. So they never learned how to deal with challenges. And so it's not really serving someone to constantly take care of them. Anyway, now I feel like I'm ranting, but I often feel like I'm ranting. So yes, nice.
We invited you to come here, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that was exactly in my bio, Kevin Griffin. We'll have a day of meditation and ranting.
It's Dharma rant.
Dharma rant. Now, there's somebody who really gets it, Dharma. I may have to put that on my, my resume. Dharma ranting, maybe a podcast, Dharma rants with Kevin. Okay, well, let's just do a little closing. This is as close as I come to a ritual. Just breathing and relaxing for a moment. Noticing how you're feeling right now. Very, really intense day of working with and looking at these questions. The Buddhist tradition is to share the merit or to really give away all the karmic benefit of our spiritual practices, the final letting go. So if there has been some goodness that has come out of this day, we dedicate the merit of that to the awakening of all beings. And I also really like to take a little time for gratitude after a period of practice, to recognize that the fact that we were able to be here is the result of decades of people here in this community who have built and sustained this center, even as it's moved around geographically, it's kept its principles and values, traditions. And the ecumenical aspect of that is also a reminder of how everything we've learned through the Dharma has come through so many different cultures over thousands of years. And to think that each generation has kept these teachings alive in different countries, different societies, through different historical periods. Somehow, despite all the human madness, the Dharma has been preserved, and we receive it. It's a great gift of human history that this is available to us today, and that we live in an era where all of these teachings are so freely available. Nothing like this has ever existed in human history. So, gratitude for that, for the great benefit and our great good fortune to be here in this moment when the Dharma is so freely given. And then to also acknowledge the tradition of recovery that's almost 100 years old, founded in our nation here, and also kept alive one generation, one day at a time. That we are the beneficiaries of that as well, of the efforts of many thousands and millions of people over these decades to pass on these principles and tools of recovery. So we express our deepest gratitude to these two traditions, all those who have come before us. And we accept our own responsibility to sustain these traditions for the next generation so that they too can derive the benefit we have from these rich and precious teachings. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be free from addiction, craving. May all beings be happy, joyous, and free. All right, everybody gets out of school early.